Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We're coming to you from Chicopee, Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal system, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, this is right off the canal trail, but yes.
So today we'll be talking about the Baker Vawter. So what does Baker Vawter make?
Vawter, but it's spelled V-A-W-T-E-R. All right, and at that location, they made mostly binders for printed pages that were for like accountants or for doctors. And they made specially made binders so the doctors or accountants or scientists or engineers could bind them into these folders that were going to keep them there. And it wasn't like a loose leaf folder or a spiral bound folder. These things here, you would have to screw into position. And so they were definitely, and I've seen these and I've worked with them before. Now along the way, we're going to talk about its history and who bought them out and the location that they're at. But I'm going to tell you exactly what they made. But the best thing is go to my webpage and look up this mill. It's near the bottom of my mill page. And you'll get to see colored pictures of what they were making. And it's very unique. They call them the perpetual ledger, and by that they mean that you can add pages to them, but it's very difficult. You take pages out, but it's very difficult. It's something that a very serious professional would need. It's not like one for students where you can just add and subtract all the time. And they had spacers to them. They had different sizes to them, and they were just what you needed to do. So they'd make special ones just for a doctor that had a certain size, certain kinds of pages inside of them. Same with engineers, lined, gridded pages, so forth. Same with accountants, of course. They're very similar to what the National Blank Book did and Eureka did, but they made the binders for these specially made for different situations, right? And that was what kept them in business.
And what is the history of Baker Vawter?
Okay, now the history of the Baker Vawter mill in general. The Baker Vawter was a place, and I'll tell you this location later, but it's a place that was discrete off of the beaten path from all these other mills. And it was built there because it wasn't a producer of pulp paper, right? And we pick up on them in Holyoke in the late 1880s, and they stay there and they do their simple job. And the way their mills were set up was small, and it was 2 floors high, and it didn't use much energy. So even though it was near one of the canals, it didn't use that. I think it was mostly using electricity by the end. And it's very important to note that what they were doing could be specialized to a given section of their factory and not move from that place until it was finished. Remember, you're just making the equivalent of binders for special made situations, for custom situations. So you just stay there, and then another part of the factory, they'd make something else. Now, the history was that they stayed there about the 1890s or so through the 1900s, 19-teens, and we find them in the 1920s and 30s also there in that location doing the same job. And remember, scientists, in terms of those professions, might be changing on the outside, but what information they're collecting is incredibly different all the time. And at one point, they actually shared a mill with a garment company. So the Baker Vawter had the basement, the first floor, and the third floor. And the Baldwin Garment Company had the second floor, right? And, of course, you need lots of storage places because these are fairly big binders.
So, quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, If you want to find out any more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun, educational, outdoor activities for the whole family, or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. They're also good just for getting out for a day. So, getting back to our interview, who bought out the Baker Vawter?
Okay, the company that bought them out in 1940, and they stayed in Holyoke until the early 1970s, was a company called Remington Rand. And talk about an eclectic company. The Remington Rand Company, even themselves, are a combination of Remington and Rand, and then they started combining. But they made, for instance, through the Remington Company, they made guns and pistols, and through the Rand Company, they made computers, and they bought out this company, and they just put it into their business. Now, I said they're eclectic. You're making binders, specialized binders. You're making guns, and you're making all these little trinkets. And they ended up making, the Rand Company ended up making the first computer that could be sold to people. It was called the Univex, and they made that, I think, in 1950. And they would sell those. The computers back then were as big as a person's garage, and they'd sell for $1 million a piece. And can you imagine the tablet I'm holding in my hand now has more power and costs about $100? What a difference. But they were a company that kept changing and changing. For some reason, they bought out this binder company, and they continued making binders at that location. So it was a very strange situation.
So where was this factory located?
Okay, so it was on Berkshire Street at the intersection with Main Street, and it was tucked in somewhat near the third level canal, about maybe 200 feet away from it. So it wasn't using canal power at all. It was using electricity, and it didn't really have powerful things to do. Of course, you're just making custom-made binders. You don't need a lot of power for that. But they wanted to be located in the paper city because the paper was there. The other groups like National Blank Book and Eureka making the pages for these binders was also there, and so they were there, and they could do it all at once. Put the papers inside of it, get the binders all set up for their special made custom people, and then ship them out. And every year of the user said we want to change this and that, they could do that right on the spot. So it was a great job. Now, sadly, that mill is not there anymore. It was always very small. Right now, it's in the front of the waste disposal site in Holyoke, and there's nothing on that part of Berkshire Street at all.
Thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more on his website, and that's holyokecanaltour.org.